Hi everybody, today we are taking a little code walkthrough for my add-on RightMouseNavigation just to see how everything works, give you a better understanding if you wanted to fork it, modify it, do your own thing with it. So this is going to assume basically no knowledge about the Blender Python library or Python in general. So it might be a bit basic for people, if you know your way around, you can just probably read the code and get all this. I try to use literal variable names and just document, using comments in plain English to just kind of spell out things line by line. But this is just a more in-depth tutorial for people who, want to get under the hood and don't really have, maybe the experience to figure out just from code alone. So once we start to dive in here, we can basically ignore two of these things right away. So the license, this is the GPL license. It explains what you're allowed to do with it. It doesn't have any functionality within Blender. Same with the README. The README is this right down here. It's the documentation you can read on GitHub. Again, doesn't have anything to do with Blender. The final three, preferences, right mouse navigation, and init, these are the three that Blender is going to be using. So let's just go to the main one right here, the main Hunga Dunga, right mouse navigation, and we'll take a little stroll through. So first thing we're doing is we're importing some Python libraries. So Bippy is the Blender Python library. We're also importing C types to allow us to use some C types, and the math library. So there are a couple of things in here that are added by Biaru, and the same for the init, that I will do my best to explain, and hopefully I am not screwing them up because, like I said, it was a bug fix they submitted, and I'm not super familiar with C types, so I may get some of the nomenclature off. But basically, we're starting out here with point, and what point is a very accurate location for X and Y. So accurate location for our mouse cursor in the horizontal and in the vertical. Next, we move on to, again, the main guy. This is our right mouse navigation operator. So what I found was, in order to make this work, I needed to essentially have a timer that decided, okay, has this mouse been held down long enough for it to be considered navigation mode? Should I switch into that walk fly navigation? Or was it just, a quick little click and they just want a context menu to pop up? So we're going to do that with a timer. And before we start, we're just going to initialize all of the variables we're going to be using here. So timer, none, count, 0, move distance, 0, mouse right up. This is part of that C types, and we'll get to this in a little bit. And then we're going to set a couple of, or a few flags here. So finished, false, column menu, false, ortho, false. And we'll get into details about what that is in a moment. So we're going to skip over modal. That is our loop, but we're going to skip way down to the bottom here. And we're going to start at the start. So the first thing that we're going to do is invoke the operator, which is going to store our cursor location in that point class that we just described up there. So again, we've got some C types in here to get the cursor position. We're going to store our own variables of mouse X and mouse Y we're going to store these values as these values. And then the same down here for the Blender cursor position. So there's a little bit of stuff that happens, I guess, and again, we'll get to it, where essentially it looks like we're syncing up the Blender cursor with the Windows cursor. That is, again, part of the Biaru code. So I believe that there's just some issue that came up where it, desynced, one cursor is just slightly off set from one another. So there's a little bit of, it looks to me like realignment, but again, they can clarify that if that's not in fact how it works. Okay, so next we're going to execute the operator. So first we check if we are in the 3D viewport, and if so, then we just run that walk operator, because again, that is coded into Blender That's not something that I had to add to get this add-on working. And then we check if we're in orthographic view, set it to perspective view, because essentially this walk fly navigation doesn't really work in orthographic. So we just make sure that we are in fact in perspective. Next thing we're going to do is add a timer to the window manager, and then we add the modal event, and then we return running modal. Then this last little bit in here, there was a conflict. It could be texture paint mode because it's active in the viewport as well, or the 3D viewport as well as the 2D editor. I believe this was just a little sort of patch because I needed to get the panel bound to the right menu again in that 2D space, even though I shouldn't be affecting it, but because that the image editor and the texture paint mode shares a 2D and 3D viewport, I had to just put in this little patch that makes it work again in the 2D viewport. So you can kind of ignore this. This isn't really part of the logic. We'll get into another part where you'll see more of this stuff happening. Okay, so running modal, let's check out our modal loop, because this is where all the magic happens. Okay, so our loop, preferences, context.preferences, add-on preferences. So we're telling it to look in our add-on package to get this preferences, and we'll be going through those preferences in a moment, but it's fairly clear what they are and how they work. So again, if we're in perspective viewport mode, then orthographic view is false. That's just a little personal flag that we are using here. Or not a personal flag, but you know, just related to this. It's not a Blender thing. Okay, the finished Boolean acts as a flag to exit the modal loop. It is not made true until after the cancel function is called. So if we're finished, if this is the end of the loop up here at the beginning, which of course will be false when we first call it, but when we're finished, then we're going to reset the Blender cursor to the previous position and reset the Windows OS cursor to previous position. So that's what I mean about that resyncing. That's what I think that is happening there. And if call menu is true, then we're going to call the menu and return canceled. So it's going to stop running the loop. So let's say we're not finished. Then we're going to move on here. If we're in the 3D viewport, if the event is a mouse movement, and if the move distance is less than the distance preference that we set in the add-on. So when we initialize our variable's move distance, we set it to 0, and then we check, have we moved less than the distance preference? And how do we figure out you know, how much we've moved? Well, here's the math down here. X delta, Y delta. So this is giving us the change in the horizontal and the change in the vertical position. So event mouse X, so its current horizontal position minus its previous horizontal position. Same with the change in the vertical. So it get its current vertical position minus its previous vertical position. And then delta distance is calculated as the square root of the change in the horizontal times itself plus the change in the vertical times the change in the vertical. Again, change in the vertical times itself. So that makes self move distance plus equals to delta distance. So we're going to take the existing value of move distance and we're going to add the delta distance value to that and make the new value for move distance what it was plus delta distance, whatever that is. So next we have if event type in right mouse. So if we're navigating and the right mouse button is released, what do we need to do? So here is one of the things. I know we've already used C-types a couple of times already, but this was the original thing that prevented this from working on Mac or Linux, because I have to call the WinDLL to fake a right mouse up action. I'm not sure why I need to do this. I just know that when I do, it works the way I want it to, and when I don't, it doesn't work. So I've been looking at maybe replacing this with PyInput to see if that can get it, cross-platform, but then I would also have to figure out for the rest of these WinDLL calls something that is equivalent for Mac and Linux. Anyway, that got a little bit off track. So if we have a right mouse release, then we're going to fake another one, which again, just a little band-aid makes it all work. Blender will not by default show you the, the mouse cursor, the arrow, when you're in navigation mode. So we just have a manual call to display it again. And then we've got this, let's see what note I wrote and see if it's more clear than what I'm about to ramble on about. If the length of time you've been holding down right mouse and mouse move distance is longer than the threshold value, then set flag to call a context menu. That seems fairly clear. So if self.moveDistance is less than the distance preference we set in the add-on preferences, and self.count is less than the time preference. So again, we've just got a distance threshold and we've got a time threshold. How far did you move the mouse? How long did you hold right mouse button for? Then we say to call the menu. And we cancel out of that. Finished is true. You pass through and you can loop back up to here where now finished is true and you exit. Event timer, that is just creating our time threshold down there. So we've got movement threshold logic up here. We've got time threshold logic down here. And then we've got this whole right mouse logic in the center. That takes care of, navigating. What about if we want to call a menu? There's a couple of funky things that happen with Blender's naming conventions. So here, I'll read on my notes and then we'll see what else I feel the need to explain. Try to call a context menu, and if that fails, call a context panel. Most of Blender's context menus can be called with the code in the try except section, but there are a few modes that don't follow the same conventions. These are accounted for here. So if we go to try except down here, it looks like the basic naming convention for this call menu operation is we pass in the name of the menu as, we're in the 3D viewport. It's a menu type, MT menu type, plus, and we take the context mode. We take the mode that we're operating in. So whether that's, edit mode, object mode, whatever, and we make it lowercase. So, we're by default seeing the mode set in uppercase. So all we have to do is really drop it down to lowercase and then add context menu. And that should give us most of what we need. Some of the modes use menus, others use panels. Basically, menus are like the text-only menus in the text-only context pop-ups, that kind of look like this in Blender. And the panels are the ones that have more advanced functionality, like the color picker or, sliders, those kinds of things. So there's a few modes that don't follow that basic convention, and I just have to do a couple little extra things. So I think this was like edit arma is what that one goes. That one doesn't have context menu at the end. And this one, instead of edit text, it's edit font. You saw that same kind of band-aid on the image editor mode where it's shared between the two things. So is that, then we go cancel and we remove the timer, and then that is that. So moving on from RightMouseNavigation, let's check out our preferences. So like I said, fairly simple. We're setting up the preference here. This is what we call it. And then setting up the default values as well as soft, minimum, and maximum, and the description. So these two are what you're going to see in the add-on preferences. And this is how you're going to set up, how you see it. So I found this a little bit confusing doing the draw method when I first started with the Blender apps. So I'm just going to walk through it in the way that, it made sense to me. Because, I don't know, this is probably something that's immediately obvious to other people, like who've been developing a little bit longer. but yeah, like I said, it took me a few minutes. Anyway, so we are drawing now the menu. So the layout will inherit from our layout. Our row will inherit from the row, the layout above to create a new row. And then this row will have a new property, and that will be the property we set up above. Then we're going to create another row and then add a second property, and it's that property that we set up right there. Okay, so back from preferences into the init, and this is where the last little bit of magic happens. So these are the things, like I said, you're going to see in the add-on preferences. This is the rest of what you're going to see. Yeah, anything you want to change, anything you need to add, you can do up there. Then we're going to import Bippy, the Blender Python library, and then from dot, which is Python for from the folder that contains this file, like the init file. RightMouseNavigation, import blue eye RightMouseNavigation. So from the from dot RightMouse, so from this folder, the file RightMouseNavigation, import the operator RightMouseNavigation. From this folder, the file named preferences, import navigation preferences. Next up, add-on keymaps. We're creating an empty list. Next, we've got the register function. So this has another little bit of funky stuff added by Biaru. This is, I believe, a known issue with Blender. I hope I'm explaining this correctly. And if not, roast me up and give me the correct explanation. So if not bippy.app.background, if the Blender app is not working on something in the background, we're going to register these classes, and we're going to register our keymap. So the known issue basically with Blender is if your add-on has a keymap or needs to have a custom keymap or modify keymaps in some way, that can get wiped out in the Blender startup process. And again, I don't know exactly the details, but basically it's, registering add-ons in one step, and then it's registering a keymap in another, so your keymap gets wiped out, and this is to compensate for that. And hopefully I'm doing it justice, but like I said. So next we're going to register the keymaps. So we've got a key config and we've got a number of areas. If not all, if we don't have an active keymap for every one of those areas, then set a timer and we're going to register the keymaps over again. So if we, check and these don't line up, then run this again. If it doesn't line up, run it again. If it doesn't line up, run it again. Or else, when it does, when everything is simpatico, everything is happy, then we move on to the window manager, the adding a key config. So we create a new keymap that will be active for the 3D viewport, and we add a new item to it that has the operator and the button and the value. So we're going to activate that and append these two. So we're going to add this to add-on keymaps, that empty list that we created up at the top. Next, we've got our menu modes and our panel modes. Like I said, there's a bunch of modes that just call a text menu. A bunch of modes will call a panel that has more advanced functionality, like the color picker. You can almost tell, just by looking at the modes that, these have that a little more functionality to them. So the menu modes: object, mesh, curve, armature, metaball, lattice, font, pose. We have a list. Panel modes is also a list composed of 1, 2, 3, 4 items. So for I in menu modes, so for each of the modes in menu modes, for each key in the keymap items, if the key is, or if the operator is call menu and the key is right mouse and it's active, deactivate it. Same with the panel modes. If for each of those modes, for each of the keys in those modes, if the key is running that operator, running the call panel operator from the right mouse button and it's active, we want to deactivate it. Same when we go through the walk modal map. So in the original walk modal map, because I'm keeping the WASD, all that navigation stuff, I'm keeping the mouse wheel to speed up and down. All that stuff is built into Blender. So I only have to make a couple of small changes to the things that are potentially going to conflict. So for the key in the key map, if the value is cancel and it's set to right mouse and it's active, deactivate it. And same for confirm, because essentially, oh yeah, and it's right here. What we want to do is we want to check is confirm active, and is it set to right mouse? Then we're going to rebind it to the right mouse release, because cancel will reset you to the original position you started in. So if you're on the left side, you want to navigate over to the right side, and you cancel, you're going to snap back to the left side. So we want to make sure that it's confirm that's bound, and cancel doesn't have anything to do with our right mouse, because otherwise that would be super annoying. Okay, then we get to our unregister function. This is where we had a little bit of funny business happening, but I think we've got it all worked out now. Again, if the app is not in the background, we're going to unregister, and then we're going to go through the same thing. We're going to clear that list, going to go back through all of these modes and essentially just reverse everything that we did. So if there's a key like this, activate it. If we're calling this panel, activate it. If we've got and then, yeah, if name equals package, so you might be used to seeing if name equals main, but if you got a multi-file add-on, if name equals package goes down here instead, register. And that is the full walkthrough of RightMouseNavigation. I hope that helps some people. So it's a GPL, so feel free to modify and spread and enjoy. Thanks very much. Bye.